Welcome to the Be Your Own Answer podcast, empowering good people like you to amplify your voice, your message, your movement. We believe that when 10,000 uncommon leaders step into high-level platforms, we will transform and heal communities across the planet. It's time to be your own answer. And now your host, Narissa Street.
Hey, how are you guys? You know where you are. It's the podcast. It is the podcast. I know you know this is the podcast because you're subscribed. If you haven't subscribed, of course, you're going to want to subscribe after you hear this episode because we have with us the absolutely amazing. So she's laughing because she already knows how amazing she is, but you don't know how amazing she is. The amazing Ashley Robinson.
Best intro ever.
Awesome. So the folks don't know who you are and how awesome you are. So who are you?
Who am I? Well, hello, everyone. I am Ashley Robinson. I am a proud Black woman who is navigating the nonprofit progressive space in the District of Columbia. I've been a fundraiser for almost 10 years now, and I am super thrilled to be here today.
Yay. So she's being like incredibly humble. She's worked with some fantastic organizations. She can tell you more about them. But the organizations are really responsible for getting some great policies in place that are protecting people of every color, ilk, orientation, but just making sure that human rights are being placed in policy. Which we are at the state and the stage where this has to be a thing. It's one thing for us to just assume that everybody's going to do unto others as you want them to do to you. But we really need to have some protections and policies in place. So she really has been a champion and an advocate behind the scenes, really making sure that these policies have the backing of major organizations. And so she is where the money resides, everyone.
I am. I like that. Yes. That's on Mary Had a Little Lamb.
Yes. On Mary Had a Little Lamb. So we wanted to really have you come to the podcast because on this podcast, we amplify the voices of women in uncommon places of leadership. I think everybody thinks that to be a leader, you have to have a big title, but to be a leader, you just have to stand firm in the position that you're in and be of someone who is going to be of impact and value. And here you are.
Here I am.
Yay. So let's get into it. Let's get your story. So what are you really excited about right now in your line of work?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, I'm a fundraiser, specifically an individual major gifts fundraising. So like talking to some of the wealthiest people in this country. And actually, given the events of, over the past year with this racial reckoning, although I don't know if it can be called a reckoning if there's not a lot of accountability being taken, but it has I think something that's really fun is great is I'm seeing more people opening their wallets with zero restrictions, like a lot of the times there are strings attached to what donors give out. You know, they want specific reporting, or things have to be in a certain way, programs specifically developed, et cetera, et cetera. But now I'm seeing more of just like here's this money, do with it what you want, put it towards what is needed best. And in that same vein, I'm seeing like foundations also loosening a lot of their restrictions and becoming more of like mutual aid.
Talk a little bit more about, since you're using a few terms that my audience might be unfamiliar with. So talk about mutual aid, but then I'm going to circle back to major gifts, what that means.
Absolutely. So mutual aid, it's really just like a collection of money that goes to whoever is in need of it with no questions asked. A great example, so I used to work at Sierra Club, and I was part of the PWU union. And so one of the things that, Progressive Workers Union.
Thank you.
So one of the things that we had been bargaining for in 2018 now was really the support of Black and Brown women working within the organization. And so we're still in the process, but we were allocated some funds to be directed towards that, that we're now creating into like a mutual aid fund. So like if somebody has, for example, an incarcerated family member that they need to send money to, okay, all you have to do is ask. And we don't need to know the reason, because that's none of our business. If you have expressed that there is a need for something, we're here to provide that. So it's still like very much in the works. I want to be clear about that. But that is like the direction that we're headed to. And that's what I'm starting to see. Slowly but surely in the fundraising arena, it's still very much kind of antiquated. But, with the impact of social media and current events, it's prompting a much faster turn in that direction.
That's fantastic. And I think, as somebody who has worked both sides of fundraising, myself, either being the grant panelist or the grantee.
Yeah.
Right. I echo you in being interested in the strings being loosened. Now, I do understand the need for accountability. So if I give you a large sum of money that has been promised for a particular purpose, then definitely I do want to see some sort of return on that purpose. But like things like mutual aid and, for smaller things, I love the idea that, it's more accessible, because the conversation about what fundraising is about and the creation of funds is really to make a more equitable distribution of resources, and so some of the equity conversation has to do with people not knowing how to tell the story, right? So if you have people who don't have the resources and the education to tell the right story, then they still are not going to be able to get to a place where they get the education to tell the right story. So, or even the experiences that they need. Oh, this is what the person's looking for. This is what the funder needs to hear. So I'm really excited about that, because I sat on a few panels and I know that it really was the best told story.
Yeah.
Not necessarily the impact, the immediate impact. So
it can be frustrating with like for people who are applying for funds like that, like we have this history of like granting like really big organizations who already have like a really big platform in these funds, and kind of just like pushing aside smaller people who, like, a lot of the times they are truly the ones who are doing the boots on the ground work and like really having an impact in their community. But historically, those are the people who are receiving the least amount of funds. And if they do, it's like all these super unrealistic restrictions that have been placed around that funding. So it's been like very difficult to kind of move through that world.
Yeah. And I appreciate the hearing that that's starting to shift, because, really great grassroots organizations, at least locally where I am, I see them start and then the founders burn out, and so I'm excited about us, and as the question was posed, what are you excited about? I'm excited that that's starting to change and move. So that's really excited. So I want to ask a question that I think I think we know what it is, but I don't think we do. So how would you define fundraising?
I've always described this as like the weirdest job ever. But it is truly identifying people with significant capacity, building what we call a case for support. So that's essentially like, hey, this is my organization. This is what we're trying to do. Make a really compelling argument for why it should be funded. And then, well, in my line, individual giving, major giving, I literally approach individuals who I think both have the capacity as well as the inclination or connection with the issue, organization, whatever the case may be, to give. And so when I was in graduate school, actually, I got my master's in fundraising management. One of the things that they really drilled into us is like fundraising is really relationship building. People give to people. And so I've spent a lot of time building relationships, even friendships, with these donors and getting them like really excited and passionate and invested. Like you want to feel like, hey, if I'm giving you a significant amount of money, like I'm really attached to this organization. Like I feel like some sort of ownership, some type of connection to the organization. So I identify as a frontline fundraiser. So I'm literally out in the field. I have traveled all over this country, asking people for money, going to their homes, getting lunch, breakfast, dinner, whatever the case is, and trying to make the world a better place, slowly but surely.
Hey, this is a great episode, right? Want to carry the insight from our show wherever you go? Visit myjoyisvaluable.com for the best resources that we've gathered that are inspired by expert guests. Find support for your business, tools to organize your life, and more. That's myjoyisvaluable.com.
Interesting. It takes money to get money, because if you've been traveling, lunch, going to people's houses, flying around the world, or around the country or however, I really think people don't get that, like that part of the burnout for some nonprofit funders or artists or whatever is they're like, well, here's the work.
Yeah.
But you still have to make an investment in, as you say, the case.
That's right.
The case for support.
A lot of the time and effort, 80 to 90% of the time, you're still going to hear no, or not right now. So like the yeses tend to be few and far between. So like when you do get them, it's like, oh, did I win an Oscar? Like, it's the best feeling, and you have to like really hold on to it, because it's like, I don't know when I'm going to hear another yes. Like even just, I have to count the wins and somebody just responding to an email or to my phone call. Like, as I'm sure you can imagine, I get a ton of emails. I'm sure you do as well. Wealthy people are getting hit constantly. People, asking for money. So a lot of the times it's just like crickets, radio silence. Like I'm not hearing anything, or like you really have to find someone who can connect you to them, who's already like talked up your cause or organization a bit. So it's not as cold, because there are very, very few just like, hey, we woke up and somebody randomly gave us $50,000 today. I wish that was the case, but I've only had that happen like once or twice.
And then not only that, but because it's a relationship, it's also reputation. So when you're making the calls and you are, let's say you do get the yes, then it's the follow through. So that whoever it is who made the introduction to you is not, giving you the side eye.
Correct.
Because 6 months later, your organization hasn't done what they said they were supposed to.
Correct. It's definitely a balancing act. Mm-hmm. Very kind of inadvertently. I certainly had never intended on becoming a frontline fundraiser. And that's mostly just because I am exceptionally introverted. So like being around people is a real like drain of my energy. And then you throw on small talk, and then like all of the different hurdles, class, a lot of times gender, race. It's just like, woosah. But I had always, probably since I was a teenager, I wanted to like start and run my own nonprofit. Don't ask me what it was going to be in, but I was like, I'm going to help the world by running my own nonprofit. As a teenager says, right. No, not a lot of extensive thought into it. So I had graduated from college in a very kind of ambiguous major, international studies. So I was like, I don't quite know where to go from here. So I took a year to like figure out what exactly I was going to do. And then it clicked. I was like, oh, I'm good at school. Let me look to see if there's like any nonprofit management programs. So I was like, well, I don't even know how to start a nonprofit. And so that's how I kind of stumbled upon my program. And it ended up being like super fundraising heavy, but I don't know, it prepared me for all types of fundraising. So we've mentioned grants, major giving, individual giving, annual funds, planned giving, 1,000 other things that like board, how to manage a board, things like that.
Yeah.
The financials of a nonprofit. So that gave me like a well-rounded kind of foundation. And so then I ended up actually becoming a development coordinator at the school. And so by the time I moved down to DC, I was like, okay, it's time for me to like, I call this my time in the trenches, because frontline fundraising is just like, that will burn you out quick, fast, and in a hurry.
So tell me, I want us to drill in, what do you mean by frontline fundraising? What is that?
So frontline is like people who are actually like doing the relationship management, going out, like you're the face of the relationship, you're going out to actually meet with donors. Whereas like, for example, I mentioned I was a development coordinator. So that was all behind the scenes fundraising. Like I was the one who was helping to plan like stewardship events for our donors, helping to edit like the mailings that would go out, all the like kind of grunt work.
Right.
I wasn't meeting with anyone.
Okay.
No one like really knew who I was. They still don't, but that's okay. But yeah, frontline is just like very much so like
You're the face.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Interesting. And I think it's interesting that you call yourself an introvert and have to be the face. So how do you balance in self-care with that? Being an introvert, having to, as you said, deal with the barriers. You listed a few barriers that you're going to have to confront being the front line. What's your self-care look like?
So I found it all coming to a head when I was working at Sierra Club. So again, this was my first frontline fundraising job. And I actually had the biggest territory to travel. So I had like all the Northeast, all of the Mid-Atlantic. So like Maine to Florida, all the way out to Arkansas. So like I was literally on the road all the time. I'd be waking up in hotels like, oh my God, where am I? But I was starting to get like anxiety attacks before I would go on these trips. Because a lot of times I was like literally going out into like the middle of nowhere, a lot of these places, not a Black person to be found. So it was like really building up with me. But I was really lucky in the fact that one, I had like super good relationships with my bosses where I could like really be frank and be like, look, this is like really stressing me out. I need kind of like a break from this. So they were like, pick where you want to go and where you feel comfortable at. If you want to go to Atlanta, focus on there. If you want to go to Philadelphia, focus on there. And I also, when I started planning my trips, I started planning it so that I had something special to do or look forward to. So like, I'd go to places where I knew I had family. So like, when I was getting through those meetings during the day, I'd be like, almost over, then I can go see my cousin or like see my friend or, you know, whatever it was, I made sure that there was something to kind of anchor me. So I had something to look forward to. And then I think the third final thing was, I mentioned I had really good relationships with my bosses. One of the things about fundraising in the United States is that these donor bases, pretty much across the board, obviously here and there, there's differences, but they're old and white. And so that was really contributing to my anxiety, especially like for a large, older environmental organization, which is notoriously old and white. They were never expecting someone who looked like me to come through the door. And so I ended up speaking with my boss about that. And I was like, we need different donors, if not for the fact that a lot of these people are going to be dying off soon. And like, we're going to need to pivot and engage like younger people, particularly people of color. And right now that's like not really happening. So I worked with her and I ended up piloting this program where we were intentionally working on diversifying the donor base. So like, I really had to advocate for myself. Listen, this isn't making me happy. This is actually making me very uncomfortable. And most of y'all aren't aware because you aren't having the same issues that I'm like, sure, when you come in, you know, you're blonde, you're cute, like, yeah, that's what they're expecting to see. They're never expecting to see me. And you know, you always get the comments, the microaggressions, and it's just something that like
that
is written there. I got some stories for you, girl.
Wow. So I want to make sure the audience heard this. So number one, self-care looks like a good relationship with the people that you work with.
Yeah.
Self-care also looks like building in rewards for yourself, like anchoring places that, things that bring you joy. And then the third part of the self-care is the advocacy, self-advocacy, working to develop a work relationship or a work system that really aligns with yourself, so that you're not burned out and you're not subjected to these microaggressions, which I can imagine microaggressions in fundraising must be interesting.
Yeah.
Want to hear more fantastic shows like this one? Visit blackwomenpodcasting.com, the only podcast directory and platform exclusively featuring the voices of Black women across the globe. Listen to experts in business, relationships, spirituality, culture, and more. blackwomenpodcasting.com.
I can give you a great example. So I currently work at Supermajority, which is, it's only 2 years old, but we're an advocacy organization fighting for gender equity. And so Cecile Richards, formerly the executive director of Planned Parenthood, was a co-founder of Supermajority and was executive director. So I went with her on a lot of meetings. And one of the ones, well, first I had come in, like, I like to change up my hair a lot. I put color in it. I think it's fun because why not? So I had like purple braids in. They were super cute. I want to be very clear about that. But
I'm sure they were.
So there were two women that we were meeting with. One of them was like, "Oh my God, is that real hair? Is that your real hair?" Blah, blah, blah. So I'm already like, girl, do I look like I grow purple hair? Like, no. Like,
does anyone?
Just who have you met on this planet that is growing purple hair?
Wait a second. Is that your real hair? Girl?
Like, girl.
Girl, so how did you, does your entire family have purple hair? I'm so sorry.
No, I would love it if that were the case because purple is truly my favorite color, but girl, like, let's be serious.
Right.
So that had already like put me a little on edge. And then Cecile had started talking with that woman as we were wrapping up. And well, I'm a naturally polite person, so I was gathering our things from the closet. And the other woman sidles up to me and she's like, "Oh, I bet you have to travel a lot with Cecile." And I was like, sometimes. And she was like, yeah, as her assistant, like, it's great that you do things to hold her bags and everything like that. And I was like, girl, I am the deputy director of development. We were just in a meeting with you. What are you talking about? Like, it's things like that where it's like,
I'm just gonna sit right here.
I felt like Jocelyn Hernandez had come up to me like, "Hey, maid, see you got on your maid outfit like you always do." That was very much the vibe.
But why would she? Okay, so I'm sorry. so the thing about being a woman and a woman of color in leadership, right, is the consistent barrage of people who have to come up with a story as to why you're in the same place as them.
It's
right. And this thing where they're coming up with this story as to why you're in the same place as they are, it's never in our favor. Like I don't understand. I don't understand. Like, oh, as her assistant, it's just like, oh, wow, awesome. Awesome that you are gainfully employed in a leadership position that allows you to be your fully authentic self. Not that you must be an assistant.
Right.
I applaud you, because I'm sure you did not punch her in her throat, which, see, you did not. See, I knew this. I knew this about you, Ashley. You did not punch her in her throat.
It didn't.
See? That's what I'm saying. You are perfectly aligned with this position because you did not punch her in her throat. So what I'm saying is we've got to, I mean, one of the things that we have to do is just hold each other up.
Yeah.
So I applaud you
Yeah.
that you all walked out of there unscathed.
I had gone back and told like a couple people the story. Honestly, like I had kind of shrugged it off because, again, like another day, another microaggression, but it got back to Cecile and like she was so upset. She was like, I am so sorry that happened. Like, I wish I had heard that so I could have like interrupted. So like I appreciated them, but it was just like another microaggression cut. It's like death by 1,000 cuts. Like it's.
How do you handle that? Like as the deputy director, and I feel like you have a word that you can speak to a lot of women who are in these positions where if Cecile had said something that might mess up the donation, right? So where's the self-care for you in that moment? Like, what do you do for yourself? That helps you kind of get through the gee whiz, I've got to, withstand this for the good of this organization.
I mean, I think one of the things that benefits me is that I have a lot of self-confidence in knowing who I am. This job does not define me in any way, shape, or form. You can choose to see me as the help if that is your prerogative, and this is not me shading people who are in those positions whatsoever, but like if you choose to see me as just somebody who is like holding someone's bags,
right,
that is your personal issue. But that being said, I recognize that like sometimes it just be too much and it's like, dog. I think it's important to communicate that with like my colleagues when that happens, because there is nothing that quite gets under my skin is like when we're having like one of these racial reckoning moments like within the organization when they're like, oh my God, I didn't know that this was happening. I didn't know. Ignorance is just simply not an excuse that I will permit, which is why I'm vocal about it. I continue to be vocal about it. So that way, people might feel empowered to interrupt and to speak up so that I'm not out on a limb by myself, which is something that happens so frequently, particularly to women of color, where we like are the only ones who speak up. And then nobody else says anything in that meeting or whatever. Then all of a sudden you get those emails, those Slacks, those G chats, like, wow, you're really brave. I really agree. You need to be doing that in the moment. And that's what I always tell them. Thanks for this, but you needed to have said this in that meeting. So I try and be like really outspoken and communicative about my experiences so that like we can help build up an infrastructure that's much more supportive for when these things happen.
That's something beautiful, just to continue to be vocal, but also vocal to the colleagues. And I think what tends to happen with some of these microaggressions is you're so used to it that you don't say anything. You're like, I don't want to talk about it. But if you are vocal and vocal to colleagues, then and talk to them about, well, this is how could I have been supported in the moment when something like that is happening? Please come to my defense, or just at least say something, that cuts in front of what they're saying. So very, it's interesting. We find these kind of microaggressions and things like that, everywhere, but it's beautiful that you found a voice to speak about it. So my thought, thinking about these kinds of things, about, using your voice in a way that's helpful to you. What are some ways that in the work that you're doing, so you're trying to raise funds and support an organization that is really about policy change and things like that, especially if you're still, dealing with microaggressions and things. What are some ways that you feel that we can build coalitions across industries and causes? And I think that would help, get these policies in place, get these things. So what are some ways we can build coalitions, you think?
I mean, honestly, like, even with what I've seen, like I mentioned, as part of like the Progressive Workers Union, is like that sharing of experiences, that tends to build relationships rather quickly. I'll speak from my experience. Like, I'm in the progressive nonprofit space. That's already like a pretty small network of people, particularly here in DC. And so I like joining like listservs, like just like being in community with one another. And like I said, being like vocal about those experiences, those shared experiences.
Right.
That's important. Coalition building. I mean, that's literally what we're doing at Supermajority. Like, it's literally creating these networks where like we can like really let our hair down and be like, girl, are you going through this too?
Yes.
And so like, I have served, for example, on a lot of like DEI committees, diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Yes.
The acronyms in the right order.
Right. We keep doing these acronyms in causes.
And
Yes.
so I've actually tried to like build them out from organization to organization. So like, if I'm seeing something successful that's happening, like that is something that I will literally take and be like, well, I did this at Sierra Club. I did this at CAP. I did this at Supermajority. And that has started to like pick up steam. Like, progressive spaces are starting to like get on the same page. Like, I can see a vast difference just between like when I started in this space in 2015 to where we are today in 2021. Like, when I had started at Sierra Club, I think my first or second day there, I heard Mike Brune, the executive director, say on an all staff call, which is like 200 plus people, Black Lives Matter. And I was taken aback, because we hadn't had all those signs in people's like windows. Like, this wasn't something, like, people were still very much pushing against that and being like, oh no, that's something different. That's a different movement. We're not sure about it. So like, I was like, oh, wow. And so just to see that progression, I literally just saw today that like Sierra Club had released a statement in support of Black reparations. So like, I can see the difference. We're organizing maybe informally, but we are organizing across organizations. I think probably some more like even formal organizing, like where we're being really intentional, is only going to help this groundswell that we're creating.
So really it's listening to each other, more relationship building as you're talking about, and telling the stories with each other.
Yes.
Because
key.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting. I was watching something on Netflix is just amazing. Netflix can pay me any day to be an ambassador, but I was watching any day. High on the Hog. Happy to put this in the podcast. And really how they were discussing how much Black labor literally built this country, and just the stories that are being told about, you know, places that, you know, Black people had to give up not just their lives, but the lives of their families, generations behind, like, I mean, for free labor to build out this country. But yeah, I that's interesting that Sierra Club is speaking about that. But I'm really invigorated to hear these kinds of conversations are taking place in the nonprofit space. And to be very frank, I think any of us who have a cause, we're a progressive. Like, I think people are not really understanding, if you have a cause that is going to take the status quo and change it, that's the definition of progress. So, you know, even if it's a conservative change, it's still a change. Right. And it still requires people having a vision, committing to it, working for it, getting the fundraising, you know, and the support for it. So I think we all need to think about that. So some of us, and we're going to start to wrap up here. Some of us are impatient for change. Some of us are just impatient, right? Okay, we can't. So there's a couple of things that happen when we're impatient for change. We get some things wrong about the work that needs to be done. What are some things that people get wrong about your work?
Do you mean fundraising specifically?
Sure.
I think that they think it's just like a really easy thing that, like, I approach Joe Schmo, like, hey, we're doing X, Y, and Z, great work. Can you give us $100,000? And they're like, yes, sure. I mean, that happens every once in a while, but it's few and far between. It's not the case. Like, there's this kind of like famous quote where it's like, it can take 3 to 5 years to actually get the gift. And those 3 to 5 years are spent relationship building. So again, like, all of this takes time. It takes resources, and it takes time to build those resources. But that being said, I would also say that I think a lot of times people also think fundraising is like really exclusive towards super ultra wealthy people. And so a lot of people feel like they can't, you know, contribute, or like their small donations don't matter. That is categorically, unequivocally false. Most of our best donors are grassroots donors. These are people who, I mean, I saw this last year, like when all the uprisings were occurring. Every time something came on my Instagram, my Twitter, people were opening up their wallets. And we're talking about in the middle of a pandemic, job security is like really in hell. And people were still choosing to give. People, whether it was $15, $25, whatever the case was, that adds up. That is meaningful. These are the people who are invested the most. So like, those contributions 100% count, and it turns into a movement. That's quite literally what we're doing at Supermajority. We're building a grassroots movement. we are still, the power of the people still exists. Okay. And so harnessing that is key for sure.
Wow, this has been an amazing conversation. So lots to chew on, and I like to ask some uncommon questions. So we're going to wrap with one interesting question. So money is energy, right?
Mm-hmm.
So how do you believe that we, those of us who are going to be doing fundraising and things, can develop a strong conduit for this energy versus resist it?
I mean, I think that developing more like mutual aid setups, like where we're all just like contributing the resources that we do have and making it more community focused instead of like, oh, Joe Schmo has given $100,000, so they have all the power. And it's like, no, we have all committed to this. We are all here to service our community. In fact, my boss, the way she put it was like perfect. She was like, if we could get people to give their money the way that women do as a whole, instead of the way men do, we would be in a much better place in society. So like women tend to be more like communal focused. Like, I mean, look at the way that we take care of our families. Like that's what we pour our resources into. Whereas like men tend to like hoard wealth. And so if we could get this shift towards like community resources, I think that we will be unbeatable.
That's amazing. Thank you so much for your time, Ashley. If someone wanted to with you, how would they connect with you?
You can reach me on my Instagram, which is Hurricane Tashley, Tashley. It's a nickname. But yeah, feel free to hit me up there. Always love to chat about this. I am truly a champion of like figuring out how to really integrate diversity, equity, and inclusion into these nonprofit spaces and making them as equitable as they claim to be. Okay.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I had so much fun.
Thank you for listening to the Be Your Own Answer podcast. Share this episode with someone who needs it. Find us at beyourownAnswer.com.